structuring through Mauritius into West Africa offers a lot of opportunity for different families and to different stages of their actual development. Obviously, when we work with families across Africa, we always look at both the entrepreneur's personal assets and the company's corporate assets. The first question we ask them is, well, have you thought about an exit? Have you thought about succession planning? Have you thought about estate planning? If you have, or if you haven't, which jurisdiction works best for you? Now, in around 75% of cases, Mauritius is the preferred jurisdiction for investment into Africa, from both the foreign direct investment coming in, the actual inflow, but equally for families in the continent looking to structure offshore, Mauritius is their favoured jurisdiction about 70% of the time. Now, when we talk to them about estate planning, we look at understanding, would a trust or would a foundation be the preferred structure for them? A lot of times we realise that even though they may have heard of the ideas of trusts or foundations, they're not fully aware. So we spend a lot of time explaining to them, meeting different members of the family to make sure that they understand fully what the difference is between the two structures, and then try to understand what is the family goals, what are the family ambitions, what are the shared values, because whenever you're setting up a structure like that, it's very important to have harmony amongst the family, because that's going to be the family's main vehicle to hold their wealth from the first generation right down to the next generation and ongoing. So it may take 6 weeks, it may take 6 months sometimes, having that real discussion, understanding each of the siblings' points of view, what their goals are, what their ambitions are. Do they want to come into the family business? Do they just want to be an employee? Do they want to be a manager? Do they not want to come into the family business? Some of them, they don't want to take on the pressure that their parents are putting and saying, you must come in. They'd rather go and be a lawyer or an accountant or a doctor or an artist. And for all those different ideas, there are solutions. So it's not actually a disaster if the next gen do not want to come into the business. What they can still do is set up the structures to hold the family assets, and they simply become an economic beneficiary, either through a trust or through a foundation. A lot of time in West Africa, we find there's a preference for a foundation over and above a trust. In East Africa or Southern Africa, trusts have much more of a dominance, whereas in West Africa, they like that element of control that can be had through the use of a foundation. They also like the fact that they can create the family charter, which dictates the rules and also sets out the criteria of what needs to happen to become a council member. We've seen some very interesting charters put forward towards us in terms of how the patriarch or matriarch is trying to control many years in advance what the criteria is for the next gen to come onto the council board, and that can be good as well, because it means that it's also giving the next gen an escape route. They don't feel pressured to come into the business if they don't really want to add any value, or if they want to go on their own path. Now, once they have a family structure on top, they can then look at having a holding company. The holding company can be used as a vehicle to raise financing from one of the banks here in Mauritius. It can also be used to raise financing from a joint venture partner outside of the continent, or equally from the continent. And that holding vehicle, owned by the family entity, can then be used to hold their investments in the underlying operating companies in one of the African countries. So we see a number of families and business people taking their core business strategy from their home country and then looking to replicate that across many, many other African countries, quite often at scale. I spoke earlier about the scalability of businesses, and there are so many opportunities across the continent that if you can demonstrate that there really is a scalability to your business, then it's much easier to raise funding, certainly from the likes of the DFIs or the private equity funds. If it's not as scalable or as obvious straight away, then the banks will obviously come in, depending upon what the project is, where the risks are, and so forth. Now, an advantage for having that holding company here in Mauritius means that you can raise financing, you can know that you have your access to multiple currency bank accounts. You can exit cleanly through the Mauritian vehicle, with the proceeds going back up into the family vehicle. Many of them have no intention of exiting. They're still trying to grow. They want to grow for many generations to come. but it's an interesting concept, that if they wanted to, that they could.